what's going on in all of this is um, like I was saying in the chat, we kind of got stuck on a little bit of semantics, and that's okay, it happens. But you can throw all that out, all the semantics. What matters is we know for sure, all language aside, we repress things into our unconscious. There's no arguing that. Everybody does it. 100% of people. Um, and then how do we deal with that? And what gets repressed into the unconscious? And if you want to use different words for some of these things, that's fine. What do you do with what gets cast into the unconscious, especially when it's done as repression and not suppression? And by the way, repression is where we do so unconsciously. Like that's where sometimes we might have a trauma, whether it was a short period of time ago, or maybe even when we're children, and then we don't even have a memory of that, or maybe we remember it completely in a fantasy way that was completely contrary to the facts of the matter. And so we've repressed and sometimes even diluted the truth around something that we've repressed that has happened, or a side of ourselves. Whether and we talked a lot about masculine and feminine, and that's just because the opposite of a energy that we label one thing is a certain energy that we label another thing, and you can throw on all kinds of labels. The fact is, there is some whatever you want to call them, energies, polarity, personality traits that go along more with estrogen than testosterone, that go along more with bearing and rearing children than other things. And so, not necessarily just Carl Jung, but over the thousands of years, certain personality qualities have gotten labeled certain ways, and then their opposite has gotten labeled certain ways. And the reason this is all important is because um, when we focus on one thing, and this is where I'm surprised we haven't gotten to this area, which is persona versus shadow. As important as animus or masculine, feminine that might be, one that's a little easier to get to and less sticky with the language is persona versus shadow. So in other words, what we present to the world as, look, here's me, I'm cool, I'm great, I'm confident, or whatever else that you might want to present to yourself as the world. Maybe even you present yourself because of some uh, imbalance. You present yourself as the opposite. Look at me, I'm weak, I'm a victim, or whatever. But whatever that you present in your persona, the opposite is usually repressed or suppressed into the shadow. Anyway, I say all that to say this is all to deal with primarily, above all, what gets repressed into the unconscious. And again, I focus on repressed versus suppressed because repressed is when you don't know what happened, and you might even be in total, uh, like you'll die for the fact that you don't want to admit that you have repressed something. Uh, and so, since there's that repression of a part of a person's personality, and sometimes it's causing what Jung might call a neurosis or a disorder or disease, whatever language that we might want to use for it, we can figure out what it is, how it got there, and how to integrate it. And the way that we do that, to this most recent topic, is um, dreams and journaling and reflections, and I guess kind of land with this thought, which is, I think Ryan and I, maybe some others, we're going to start doing some rooms on dreams, specifically on a book by Robert Johnson. It's not very long, called Inner Work, but it talks about like a 4-step process to deal with your dreams and a 4-step process to deal with your active imagination, which is kind of like intentional daydreaming. But what you find in not just noticing that you dream or noticing that you have a daydream or whatever is, but you start to journal out the patterns, or like sometimes I'll do voice notes for the patterns first. Um, then you start to notice the patterns, and then that shows what has been put into the unconscious, because that's why it only comes out that way, because it's in the unconscious. And then when you can bring it into the unconscious, you can integrate it, and then you can start to have a healthy, heal. And Jung, his main goal, that's why I put in the chat a while ago that he is metaphysically agnostic strictly, and he's a pragmatist because whatever works for a person in their faith is great, as long as what he's after is the one thing pragmatically: individuation, which some would call that enlightenment, and maybe the East, some in the West might call it salvation even, but he would maybe just call it the individuation process is the process to become whole and to become healed and to become mentally healthy. So anyway, that's a little synopsis.